Hey guys, how are you? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing yet another movie review. This movie is a horror comedy from the United States, English language, released in the year 2015, directed by Brian James O'Connell, and this film is called Bloodsucking Bastards. So Bloodsucking Bastards is set in an office. You've got the main character who's hoping to be promoted from acting sales manager to sales manager, and he has a good feeling about this because his boss, who he's been very close to for quite a while, has a big announcement to make, so he thinks that this is going to be the day. So he tells his friends, he tells the love of his life, who he's recently broken up with, in the hopes that this news will enable him to get back together with her. But this excitement turns to disappointment when he realizes that he's not getting the job. In fact, it's going to someone who's from outside the company that has a bit of history with him. So this history is very tense. He did wrong by this new boss, and so there's a lot of animosity between the two, and they don't really want to work with each other. So this animosity and disappointment starts to turn to curiosity when this main character realizes that there is something off about his boss. The work is unusually focused, and some of his friends start to go missing. So he believes that the boss has something to do with this. So the further he digs in to investigate, the more he uncovers a terrifying secret behind this boss that is going to force him to go from a no-hoper to a hero. So whether or not he can save the day in time is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Blood-Sucking Bastards. This movie is said to be between Office Space and Shaun of the Dead, and ultimately I do have a big problem with that comparison, because I believe that there is one ingredient in this film that is missing that halts the progression of this film quite considerably and makes it quite a mediocre experience, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But I will say, thankfully, there are some likeable traits to this film, and I think the most likeable one is the fact that I can compare this to the Americanized version of The Office, in that you've got a very relatable character in Jim, who really plays well off the caricature characters. And I thought this movie had the same sort of vibe, in that you got the main character who is the relatable one, and his common sense is a direct contradiction to the lack of common sense from those around him. And so it's kind of like the Deadwood, and Deadwood in humour can be very effective, and I thought it was somewhat effective in this film, in that he's the guy that you can relate to, and he's the guy that's the vessel to step into almost an alternate reality. This is a movie where these people are acting in a very caricature way, so it gives you that lighthearted approach, and that lighthearted approach is what keeps the tone of a horror comedy, and it's what really should have made the film more memorable than it was. And so you've got his friends who are no-hopers, and it feels as though everyone's dragging this guy down, so you do get some sort of sympathy for him. You feel as though this is a guy that really knows what he's doing in life, but he just can't get it. He can't quite reach that goal that he wants, and that's something that everyone can relate to. We don't always get where we want, and we always feel as though we should be a little bit further than we are, and that's ultimately what this guy is doing. So he is likeable. I thought it was a fairly good performance, and when he starts to go from this no-hoper to basically the one person that everyone has hoped for, it's almost like a superhero. It's not quite the Superman, but it's like Clark Kent being someone that you wouldn't expect to be a hero to save everybody. In this movie, it's the same sort of thing. It's like David and Goliath. You've got a villain that plays fairly well off this main character. The villain is everything the main character isn't. This villain has a lot of confidence. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's very effective in his communication skills. And then on the other hand, you've got this guy who is very likeable. He's not arrogant. And when they start to clash heads, I felt, okay, these are two different worlds, two different characters coming together, and that was a positive that the film had. You've also got a very polished and crisp looking visuals that I thought actually proved that to be a high-end production. I don't think it was an overly large budget the movie has, but I thought it utilised its money very well. And you've also got some very good makeup effects as far as horror is concerned, and you've got some fairly decent horror set pieces in there with a lot of blood. I think this movie has buckets of blood, which is what you would expect from this type of film, so it does deliver what it promises, and so I like that aspect of it as well. The ending was very far out. It was very, very predictable, but the movie doesn't rely on its predictability. The movie it doesn't try to be unpredictable. It's not trying to twist and turn. It's trying to keep it as basic as possible so the viewer can really enjoy themselves, so the movie can really use all the entertainment that the movie has. But unfortunately, there lays the problem. Now, the fact that it wants to be entertaining, that it wants to be very lighthearted, and it is very predictable, you need something else to make it work, and ultimately what you need is a very good script. And this is basically the thing that ruins the film, is that this movie is contained in a cage, and the thing that's locking the cage and preventing this movie from blossoming out and showing what it's capable of is ultimately the script. The script is saying, no, you stay there, you're not going anywhere. So this is where the comedy starts to come in, and with a comedy to work, it really needs a well-written script. It needs a comedian who is very natural at what he does. But this movie reminded me of a really bad stand-up comedian trying to make the audience laugh. They're not laughing, so he becomes very, very paranoid by this. He's becoming very, he's panicking, and so he thinks, okay, they're not laughing, I'm going to have to try really hard now to make them laugh, and the further he tries, the more cringeworthy it gets. And that's ultimately the problem with this film. I rarely laughed because it's trying way too hard to be funny. It's trying way too hard to be like Office Space. It's trying way too hard to be Shaun of the Dead, where it doesn't have the actual ability to do that. And so the further it tries, the more, the further downhill it goes. And when a movie banks itself more on a comedy rather than a horror, because the horror only sets in the last 30 or 25 minutes, this is ultimately the film's weakness. Is that the film's weakness is really what it basically needed to be its strength. And so when the horror and the comedy come together, there is a genre that really overtakes the other. And so it feels as though the comedy is really missing. And when you've got a movie that's banking itself on the comedy, the platform is definitely comedy with all these exchanges, because it's not very good, you're waiting for the good parts to happen. And it only goes for 80 minutes. And I felt as though if you cut out all the unnecessary quality in this film, it'd only go for about, as I said, 30 to 25 minutes. And that's ultimately a problem because it doesn't become a feature film. So it's going around in circles. It's not really progressing anywhere. And I thought the exchanges really didn't work. As I said, there's a laugh here and there. And I thought the main character was somewhat likable. But there's no one to really complement that main character to make it a film like Shaun of the Dead and those other films that it's really comparing itself to. So that's ultimately the problem. And it's the reason why I'm not really going to recommend Bloodsucking Bastards. Has its qualities. It's not the worst film I've ever seen, but ultimately the comedy does prevent it from really, as I said, coming out of the confines of that cage. So overall, for Bloodsucking Bastards, going to give it 2 stars. I was disappointed. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.